series. They were of his achievements and service in the fields of law, education, religion, government, and politics, both central and local. And the lecture series was set up by Lord Mishcon's children, Peter, Russell, and Jane, who are all here, and who are attending with their family and friends. Lord Mishcon, of course, passed away in 2006, but the Mishcon children have continued to support the annual lecture in his memory. And we are tremendously grateful for this unfailing and incredibly enthusiastic support and contribution which they make to the life of our faculty through these very prestigious series of lectures. The Mishcon lectures, I can say, have a particular angle and perspective and an edge almost, as they're always delivered by the most inspiring people who generally remind us of the absolute necessity to uphold the rule of law, constitutional democracy, and to protect rights. I will not bore you with a list of the previous speakers, the Mishcon Lecture series, but one of them is the chair for this evening, Baroness Helena Kennedy. I will remind her of her lecture in a minute.
Who runs British? That's what I call it.
And what I do want to say also, as Dean of a faculty, that in these unimaginably difficult times, there is a greater need than ever to advocate and defend these core values of rule of law, protection of rights, and constitutional democracy. And I think today's lecture could not be more timely, but that's actually for the chair to say in a minute. But I do want to add that I think that academic institutions, including faculties of laws, have a role to play in the debate and need to stand up for these values, perhaps more than we've ever done, and take a position. And this lecture is certainly a contribution to that. So I also need to introduce the chair for this evening, although she, frankly, doesn't need any introduction, nor does our speaker. Baroness Helena Kennedy is of the shores as a barrister, broadcaster, Labour member of the House of Lords. She served as principal of Mansfield College in Oxford from 2011 to 2018. She practices predominantly in the areas of criminal law, but also judicial review, public inquiries, sex discrimination work, and she's done an incredible amount of work sort of around the law and in all kinds of distinguished bodies and organizations. For example, at present she's the chair of Arts and Business. She's a bencher of Gray's Inn, and we really very warmly welcome her as chair here. I would remind her that she delivered a Mishcon lecture in 2006 with the title, Who Runs Britain? Downing Street, Fleet Street, or the White House? Challenges to democracy in the 21st century. I'm not going to ask her to deliver that lecture again, but we should all reread it. And it's incredible that we face these issues even more than in 2006 still today. So thank you so much, Baroness Kennedy, for coming out to chair the lecture.
Well, Pete, thank you very much for that. I'm normally introduced as Helena Kennedy, the lawyer who represents women and other criminals. It really is wonderful to come back and be here. And when I say come back, I actually come every year. I am often sitting up in the gods listening. Because for me, this is a family gathering, because I consider myself part of the great extended Mishcon family. The Victor's children who are here with their spouses, with their children, because it goes on from generation to generation, and they're all really part of this extended family. Even great actors, the Marshall Halls, the David Pan, was in a class of his own. He was someone years. I mean, I remember first reading about him because of the way that he dealt with the business of Ruth Ellis and how, at that point when she was going to the death penalty, new lawyers were sought and his advice was sought as to whether there might be a way of getting her clemency or something to prevent her being hanged. Victor did many of the great cases of his time, but he was an advisor to prime ministers, he was an advisor to cabinet ministers, he was an advisor to royalty, but he was also an advisor to many ordinary folk, to people in trade unions, to miners, to many people, from the grand to the humble, and he was always the same. He was always the same. The care, the consideration, the great lawyering was there for whoever were his clients. And he had a really great, finely honed legal brain. When I went into the House of Lords, which was in 1997, he became my mentor. He was someone who really understood how the whole business worked. And of course, I had known him through his children, but he was a friend, and it was wonderful having him there in those early years. Well, now I'm going to turn to this evening, because nothing would have given Victor Mishcon more pleasure, I think, than being here for you, Gina Miller, because he was a great European. He was a man who believed in the great European project, in the whole way in which, after the horrors of the Second World War and things that had happened to the people of his own faith, the terrible atrocities, that out of that came great efforts to try to secure peace and justice into the future. And the European Union was part of that great project. And so he believed in it. He would have been, I think, quite horrified at the way in which we are now involved in such a morass. But he would have also loved the fact that you're a beautiful woman. He also loved the fact that we Europeans kiss each other on both cheeks. He was a most delicious and wonderful man, and I adored him. Anyway, for me to be here introducing Gina is a great treat, because like all of you, I imagine, there may be dissenters in our midst, I have no idea, but for those of us waking up on the morning after the referendum and the wretchedness of that decision, as it was for me, I mean, I kind of wept into my porridge, but all I can tell you is that for most of us, depression descended. Not for Gina Miller, because immediately there was a sense of what is happening. And unlike most of us who felt sort of kind of crippled by the fact of it, she immediately thought what had to be done. And she is a great believer in representative democracy. And her feeling was that it didn't matter which side of this you were on. The idea that the cabinet might go away and that some people might be appointed as negotiators and that a deal might be done and that it would never be referred back to Parliament and that Parliament had no role in this seemed to her extraordinary. And so she came into all of our ken in the months that followed, because she was one of the people who actually went forward with a case through the courts, taking all the way to the Supreme Court, and brilliantly, of course, represented. But she went all the way to the Supreme Court with great courage and challenged the idea that a negotiated deal should not have to come before Parliament. And she reasserted the whole business of the sovereignty of Parliament and the importance of decisions being made by those who had been elected to represent the people of this country. And so the whole idea that this would return to, that Parliament should decide on whether we would trigger Article 50, and eventually that giving rise to a much more vital debate about whether there should be a meaningful vote at the end of the processes and so on. She really was the initiator of the energy that's gone into all of that. I became her friend at that time, and I really do now count her and her husband as two dear friends. I've actually twice this week gone to events to introduce Gina Miller. But the other occasion was that Harper's Bazaar give awards to women of different kinds, but they have an award that they give to the campaigner of the year. And they asked me to be the person to speak as to why Gina Miller deserved that accolade and to be given that award. And it was a wonderful occasion, and it was really important. She got a standing ovation from many, many people in that room to say that she had exceptionally campaigned for something that was vitally important, for the people who are involved in the world of design, for the people who were all involved in the world of creativity. All the people who were there in a particular field were all saying, this is important to us too, and they thanked her. I want to just say to you that in knowing her, and I was talking about Eugenia, and you know, and he was joining the intelligence you have in the work that you've been doing in recent times. Fierce intelligence, you're kind of crisp and clear, and that unique flavor, all with great courage, with great integrity, and humanity. I mean, she never ever speaks ill of the people who oppose her. She really is an exceptional woman. And many of you will not know that she, you know, her forays into the world of what is right didn't begin with the aftermath of the referendum. She's been campaigning on anti-corruption and on ethics and values in business and in banking for many, many years. And she's been doing that and having an impact in that area. She's also been a great supporter of women around the issue of domestic violence. I want you all to buy and read her book, Rise, which is a really wonderful memoir of how she came to be the woman that she is today, and an exceptional woman she is too. We're very lucky that you are going to hear from her tonight. She's going to be quite provocative, I think, in her talk, which is called What is Truth? Gina. You are wonderful.
Thank you so much, Helena, and everyone. Good evening. And to the Mishcon family, thank you so much, the faculty, for inviting me tonight, and for all of you to come, for coming tonight. A few years ago, I think Jonathan Freeland did the talk in 2006. And he recanted, I believe, that we were asked to give a title months before we were actually going to give the speech. And it's a very difficult thing to do because things change in the meantime. And originally, to market the event, my topic was going to be about reform and responsibility. But the last few months, I've sort of been thinking about it, and I don't think that's appropriate. I was pondering the state of where we are, and this feeling that I have, and possibly many of you, that we're living in some sort of alternative universe. And in this other universe, everything's fine. And that you don't worry every single day about the ground moving beneath your feet. You don't have this constant anxiety. And in this other world, you don't have data that's showing from dentists that there is an enormous, alarming rise in the number of people grinding their teeth. Where we're a nation in stress, where we're angry, our emotions are so mixed up, we're bewildered, we're worried, we're fearful, and we're confused. And in our world, the real world, unfortunately, we don't seem to have the luxuries in that alternative universe. And all of this has made me reflect and think on great writers and great thinkers of the past. And one of the writers that I've been reflecting on recently is the words of Charles Dickens from the beginning and the opening of Tale of Two Cities. And the fact that, you know, his words were that this is the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light. It was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope, but it was a winter of despair. And I reflect on those words now, often. as I do on the words of another great writer, Anthony Trollope, who some of you may know, who back in 1873 wrote a book called The Way We Live Now. Trollope had been traveling in Australia for 18 months and had come back to London in 1872, to a London, he said, had lost its soul. He wrote, "A certain class of dishonesty magnificent in its proportions, so rampant, so splendid, that there seems to be reason for fear that men and women will be taught to feel that dishonesty, if it can be splendid, will cease to be abominable." His novel focused on this egocentric, fraudulent anti-hero character who captivated London with the idea that there were millions to be made in the American railroads and that it was going to make everyone wildly rich. The only problem is the railroads never existed. And it was about stoking investors' greed in what I consider to be the first, or if probably a 19th century Ponzi scheme. In 1872 was also the year of the Great Panic in America. The US was dizzy with opportunity that stirred really outlandish greed based on dishonesty, even in the currency itself. Over 350 million unsupported dollar bills had been printed to fund the Civil War in 1861. And that started a slow contagion of greed. And the government had at that time to attempt to put back belief and credit in those dollar bills had to be ruthless. The panic began, banks went bust, 9 out of 10 railways ventures in the US collapsed, wages fell by a quarter, the productivity of the US shrunk by 25%, and for the next 2 decades, the US suffered. Perhaps in our age, in today, the worthless promissory notes, which is what that $350 million bills really were, find their parallel in the cake and eat it promises of the Brexiteers, in that eerily similar 350 million number. Thinking on Trollope's words, I find myself thinking, is this the time we are now living in? One of splendid dishonesty that's ceasing to be abominable, that's rolling back what we increasingly took for granted. These reflections brought me to a very simple question, which is why I changed the lecture I was going to give tonight from responsibility and reform to that simple question. A question of what is truth? It is a question that Pontius Pilate asked Jesus and never got a response. John Keats described it as beauty is truth, truth, beauty. We can all agree, I hope, that truth is a beautiful thing and that a lie is very ugly. But we can also recognize that truth, like beauty, is often in the eye of the beholder. When a newspaper or broadcaster told a lie about you in the past, you could sue for libel. The late, great Lord Mishcon, whose name this speech celebrates, was on hand to offer his wise counsel to his clients if this happened to them and they were wronged in this way. He didn't live to see the full effect of what I believe is happening now. A digital revolution, a social media that is meaning that principled men now have a sense of doubt, a strong sense that We no longer know what is right and wrong. We no longer know what is really truth and a lie. Suddenly, people, often hiding behind an alias, but with thousands of followers, sometimes tens of thousands, can damage your reputation, apparently with impunity. Worse, they can incite others to assault you, to kill you, abuse you on the basis of religion, race, sexuality, even gender. Ugly prejudices which we thought we had finally outlawed, but are somehow allowable again. There is a sense that because we're in a digital age, that the old rules don't apply anymore. Basic good taste, having manners, values, principles, laws that can actually hold people to account, they no longer seem to apply. We have been through, and seem to be going through, a period where lies, falsehoods, prejudices can be commandeered and weaponized as truth. The methods that are being used to attack the four estates of democracy, government, legislature, judiciary, the media, are all old, but the medium they're using is just too new, probably too new for us to quantify. The capitalizing and exploiting of ancient hatred, foreigners, members of specific faiths, and easily identifiable minority groups are old, as I say, but the modern ability to spread and infect the poison they engender is frightening. Alan Rushbridger, the former Guardian editor, and now at Oxford University, gives a shocking example of how the horizontal transmission of lies and half-truths can blast around the planet in this new information ecosystem. He labels it a germ, in the absence of any other label. In February, I want to give you an example. In February 2017, Trump used a rally in Florida to draw attention to disturbing events he said were happening in Sweden. He said, "You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden, who would have believed it? They took in large numbers and they're having problems like they never thought possible." Sweden was puzzled. They couldn't understand why they had been singled out. Nothing of note had happened the night before. The former Swedish Prime Minister, Carl Bildt, tweeted, "Sweden? Terror attack? What's he been smoking?" The following day, Trump clarified his statement to his 55 million followers on Twitter. He said, in reference to the story, it was a reference to a story broadcast at Fox News concerning immigrants rape Sweden. So began, as Rushbridger says, the autonomy of the truth according to the most powerful man on the earth. The previous Friday, on the Carlson Tonight Show, there had been an interview with Amy Horowitz, who was making a documentary on Sweden. Horowitz, on the show, said there was an absolute surge in gun violence and rape in Sweden due to their open-door policy. Who was Horowitz? He was a former Lehman Brothers investment banker turned docutainmentor. In other words, documentary for entertainment. He modeled himself, he said, on Michael Moore. He dealt in outrage, in entertainment, in provocation. In making his documentary, he had interviewed 2 Swedish police officers who later called his documentary crazy, that he was a madman, that he'd actually cut and spliced and edited their interviews to distort everything they had said. 2 main Swedish newspapers analyzed the film and found it contained serious errors and exaggerations. But the truth didn't seem to bother Fox News or Fox. Enter Trump, who appears predisposed to believe Fox tells the truth and CNN and the New York Times tells lies. So the containment began, that Muslim immigrants do unspeakable things and are mass rapists. A few days later, Trump spoke in Florida that there were riots in northern suburbs of Stockholm. No smoke without fire, you may say. But which is the smoke and which is the fire? Responsible analysis by Swedish and US journalists found that the truth actually was that rape numbers appeared to increase because the Swedish police had changed the way they were classifying the crime. It had nothing whatsoever to do with immigrants or the open door policy. Yet in the UK, Nigel Farage used his LBC show to announce that a city in southern Sweden, Malmö, was now, his words, the rape capital of Europe, with some would argue the rape capital of the world, and the Swedish media is just not reporting it. A few months later, Godfrey Bloom, a leading UKIP figure and former MEP, retweeted news of a horrific attack on a teenage girl in Malmö. An attack where the girl had been raped and the rapist had poured fuel in her vagina and set it on light, a fire. There was understandable revulsion and bitterness on social media. Websites such as Reddit retweeted. Others said, this is the 4th rape in 2 months. These tweets were traced back and came from one at Peter Sweden 7. But did the allegations actually ever happen? Yes, a 17-year-old girl had undoubtedly been raped one evening in Malmö. And the press had reported it. But there was no mention or evidence of immigrants or of a Muslim being involved. At Peter Sweden 7 had previously been tweeting things like, I don't like fascism, but I think Hitler had some good points. I'm pretty certain that the Holocaust didn't happen. And the globalists, mainly Jews, are the ones bringing in the Muslims to Europe. They're working together. In real life, at Peter Sweden 7, is a 22-year-old Swedish-born photographer who appears to live part of his time in Norway and part in North Yorkshire, with a Twitter following of 81,000. And because of these tweets, these specific tweets, his growth rate of followers were about 10,000 a month. It turns out that the alt-right website Breitbart had incorrectly translated abdomen for vagina, if you believe them. A few weeks later, the police announced that they had dropped the rape investigation after the woman, the original woman, admitted the attack had never actually happened. But by then, the virus had spread. The contamination of the truth with an ugly lie was worldwide. The germ about rape in Malmö spread indiscriminately, freely, and without borders. When Godfrey Bloom was confronted about his tweet and spreading the falsehood, his response was, "I treat social media like everybody else does, like a lavatory wall." Another example of Trump truth is him lying about figures, crime figures in Germany in 2017 due to immigration. He tweeted, "The people of Germany are turning against their leadership as immigration is rocking the already tenuous Berlin coalition." Crime, another tweet said, "Crime in Germany is way up. Big mistake made for all over Europe is allowing millions of people who are so strongly and violently changing the culture." The truth is, the official crime figures in 2017 in Germany showed that as a percentage of the population, crime was now at its lowest level for 30 years. Crimes by foreigners, specifically, had sharply dropped. It's extraordinary. As a note, by the way, what is interesting about these stats is that polls in Germany suggest Germans are more worried about crime, with 44% saying that they feel less secure than the year before, even though the figures don't show that. But I get back to Trump. Trump, like an increasing number of politicians, are using social media as a political tool for himself without any regard to facts or the truth. In the face of the story and example I've just given you, what we need to recognize is that we are being made to feel angry about things which all too often we have no legitimate reason to get angry about. This anger is being engineered to incite division, to push us in the direction of certain politicians whose vast swathes of thought is to change the world we have taken for granted. Politicians who we, in the past, would have never touched with a barge pole. If we think of the World Wide Web as a fifth estate, what will it do to our democracy? It has its own rules, and I'm not sure sometimes if it's in the business of propping up or trying to topple our society. In most Western countries, we have a complex, complicated constitutional ecosystem that has evolved over centuries. But this new digital internet revolution appears capable of destabilizing what has taken centuries to establish by re-engineering lies into truth. I agree that we have learned lots of good things from the internet. We've made new friends, we've learned more about our world, we've heard from people who live in oppressive regimes, who were previously denied a voice. But the sheer scale of what it is telling us every day makes it hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, to differentiate between the beautiful truth and the ugly lie. This fifth estate, as I call it, has proven to be worryingly and easily manipulated by groups with their own agenda, including destructive foreign powers. A medium increasingly becoming a very modern means of communicating very old hatreds. It has unleashed a creative destruction to our economies, education, information, businesses, leisure, social behavior, and most dangerously, democracy itself. We are seeing the emergence and rapid growth of powerful new global corporations, power brokers who are wealthier, more remote, more difficult to hold responsible than we thought possible. A new reality is coming to play that is enabling governments, political players, and companies to engage in the most intrusive kinds of surveillance and data. A new truth that has little, if any, respect for the law. Stanley Baldwin, the Conservative Prime Minister, once rebuked the press barons, Lord Beaverbrook and Rothermere, for pursuing power, he said, and power without responsibility, the prerogative of the harlot throughout the ages. He also said, the newspapers attacking me are not newspapers in the ordinary sense. They are engines of propaganda for the constantly changing politics, desires, personal vices, personal likes and dislikes of their owners. What are their methods? Their methods are direct falsehoods, misrepresentations, half-truths, the altering of speeches and sentences that are taken out of their context. Baldwin's words reminded me, the more things change, the more they appear the same. People could, however, in the past, chosen not to read these newspaper barons, newspapers and publications such as the Daily Mail, the Express, but the internet appears inescapable. As mighty as those newspapers were in their prime, they sought to influence a single nation, not the entire world. The internet is unquantifiable in its ability to infect our cultural consciousness, to hoodwink us with a lie disguised as truth, to communicate with a rapidity that leaves little time for consumers of its content to question the reality of the messages. In John Norton's book, From Gutenberg to Zuckerberg, he states that the internet represents nothing less than a fundamental challenge to established power structures that is taking us to either a utopia or a cybergeddon. More recently, Norton has written about the Russian hacking of the US election as being the most extreme case of how social media and the digital technology is changing our politics and democracy. As Norton says, we are finally beginning to get an idea of the long-term effects of the internet on our politics. It has been obvious for some time that social media is moving us in the direction of post-truth politics. The rise of Donald Trump, and yes, of Brexit, suggests that we have arrived at this particular destination. The internet loves extreme views. Write on it, you hate Gina Miller, or you even want to kill her, and you find yourself with thousands of followers. Write, on the other hand, you agree or might agree with Gina Miller, and there's a significant chance you'll be completely ignored or in turn abused yourself. Yeah. The internet abhors the views of moderates. It adores the views of maniacs. And that, you could well argue, explains a lot more about our present-day politics and our present-day truth. Technology's intrinsic insecurity, not to mention the obtuse motivations of those who use it, could now be seen as being the most undermining fundamental principle of liberal democracy, namely, faith in the integrity of the electoral system is being undermined. As growing numbers of people start to believe that elections are or may be rigged, is the democratic model over? The only thing we have to fear, said Franklin Roosevelt, is fear itself. which is why we should be deeply concerned by what's happening in our politics and how we are increasingly coming to terms with how what one day seems the sum of all evils can the next day be our reality. There are so many implications for the digital revolution and how it can own and disseminate truth in our society. But how will we, as advanced democracies, cope with the ensuing disruption and democratization caused by technological truth? How effective can legislation, regulation, enforcement be in this fast-moving environment? Can privacy and personal data really be protected from manipulation in such a world? Although it has only been 11 years since the smartphone, which truly revolutionized the computer in our hand, it is the pace of digital revolution and its ability to fake the face of democracy that is disturbing. How do we cope with the maelstroms of this new technology when it can whip up so much at such a pace? How can we close the gap between the pace of technical change and that of legislative and regulatory enforcement and adaptation? Could this new fifth estate really already be a failed state? With as Simon Gallagher, the IT editor of a publication called ARS Technically, puts it, warring factions are destroying the most fundamental of services. Security zones are being reduced, eliminating free movement. Security costs are making it prohibitive to police. The soft target of all of this will be political. As an optimist and someone who believes in human goodness, I believe the key is responsibility, individual and collective, that can enhance social stability. But we have, above all things, to get wise to this new force in our lives, to outwit it, not to be outwitted by it, to fight always to be its master and never, and this is the real danger, to allow ourselves to become its servant. Above all things, we must not allow ourselves simply to fear it, to let those who use it to become the snake oil salesman of our time, to become the ones coding for chaos. The truth that is now emerging is that the internet can be an incredibly useful servant to an incredibly dangerous master. Online Twitter trolls, dragooned into action by newspapers like Paul Dacre's Daily Mail, have added to the pressure, for instance, on our judges. They parrot phrases such as unelected judges. And yes, it is true that they were unelected and are unelected, but this does not mean that they lack democratic legitimacy. The law, our judiciary, like our media, are important counterweights to Parliament, to our democratically elected representatives. The important truth is that judges are not worried about re-election or political or media pressures, which makes it easier for them to make necessary, even difficult and unpopular decisions. It's a dangerous thing indeed when powerful forces willfully seek to undermine truth and malign the role judges play and tell them what to do. Timothy Snyder, in his book On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, says, eerily, when judges said a parliamentary vote was required for Brexit, a British tabloid called them enemies of the people, a Stalinist term from the show trials of the 1930s. Not merely, as Paul Dacre recently said, the title of a play by Ibsen. Yeah. I want to put on record how grateful I am to the judges in the High Court and the Supreme Court for standing their ground and for not being dissuaded by the appalling pressure that was put on them by these most irresponsible media influencers. For my legal team to not buckle was extraordinary. And our system, I think, would have been so much the worse for wear if they had not held their ground. So where does this leave us? As I said, I'm an optimist. And I'm a believer in human values. But it is time we all wake up. We mustn't just wake up. We must stand up, speak up, exercise our collective and individual responsibility. We must listen to our inner voices and recognize that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when you simply know something is wrong, when you simply know what is true. Because, to quote Timothy Schneider again, to abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, there is no one to criticize power, because there is no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacular. We must always fight to preserve the beautiful truth, as opposed to the ugly lie. Because truth offers us the thing we are all seeking: peace of mind. Thank you.
Well, I promised you that you were going to be stimulated, and you were. Gina, I do think this whole issue of the internet and the business of lies and truth is one of the great challenges of our times. And it doesn't surprise me at all that you chose to speak on this tonight. I know that you will have provoked a lot of thought in the audience and questions. And also there will be people who would like to question you about what's going to happen next.
The B word.
What's going to happen next. I'm going to hand over to Piet Eeckhout, our wonderful dean, because he's going to kind of, deal with the questions as they come through. I think that your talk was wonderful. You're just amazing.
Thank you.
And let me just echo that. It was an absolutely wonderful talk. As we all know, Gina Miller has been an extremely courageous campaigner. I think tonight she was an extremely courageous lecturer to tackle a question such as what is truth in our time. I would never have dared to it would have been a lot blander if I was asked to do something like that. And of course, as a lawyer, as a legal academic, my reflection was about what this all means for the law. I mean, how can the law survive without the quest for truth and the focus on actual hard evidence in any sort of legal dispute or case or contract or whatever? And how, frankly, how can we maintain a true freedom of expression, which really underpins our democracy, in a climate where there is no truthfulness, no decency in communications? So a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure there are many questions. Please, first person I see at the back there. And I think there is a roving mic. One. Gentleman at the back there, just in front of the camera.
Thank you very much, Gina Miller. Very stimulating lecture. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Mishcon family for the opportunity, and also UCL. Thanks to all concerned. You start off your lecture regarding ethnicities, religions, the eye of the beholder regarding truth. How does one arrive at the truth with so many differences? Where Kant arrived at universal law, how does one arrive at a universal truth that applies to all?
I think if I go to, that's a huge question we could do a whole lecture on, I think probably, or a book. But when I said that beauty, or truth like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, I think truth can be different for different people. But we have to have a benchmark for truth. Because if everyone has their own version of the truth, it would create a chaotic world. And I think we have to decide collectively what that benchmark is. But I think we do need to have one. And I think we have seen that we have survived for generations and decades having that collective understanding of truth. And for me, we need to get back to, and we need to decide in a modern age what that collective definition of truth is.
Question here.
Thank you. Talking about Trump and his versions of the truth, and also what was said about Brexit and what's come out with all the different companies who are basically changing data. At what point, if the legal heads get involved, is there any way that can be taken to court, or how do you deal with it in a legal sense if people are ruling countries and they're blatantly lying? Like, what's the effect of that, or how do you deal with that?
This is one of the most puzzling things to me, and I think to many other commentators, is you have what in any other circumstances would be a legal action. If you were in a place of work, if you were in a place, you have the norms you think you understand. But in this political place we're in, this political atmosphere, none of those seem to be applicable. And I think we are still, when I first came to public attention, I sensed that there was a real febrile environment, a real sense of fear. And I think it's still there. And in this febrile environment, I don't think any politician is going to have the courage to say, because of banks, because of the corruption, because of this, we must now undo. Even though at the letter of the law it may be, I think we are now not in legal territory. I think we are in political territory. And because of that, the normal rules of the law don't apply. I know, but that's where...
Sorry, I was going to say, but somebody has to surely from the legal system step in and go, this is illegal.
Well, we have that with the referrals that are happening on banks' payments. So you have referrals that are going through, but it is very difficult to know what the case would be. What would there be? Where do we go back to? Which was the lie? When did the lie start? Who was it the first? It is when we have so little time. This is just my view. When we have so little time left, for one thing that we do know, which is a legal time frame of 2 years, I think energies are being spent elsewhere rather than trying to go back to look through all of that legal nightmare almost. So I think it's a question not just of political action, but choosing where to expel your energies in the time we have left.
Student here back.
Thanks very much for a really stimulating talk today. My question has to do with the relationship, if any at all, between rising levels of inequality and people becoming perhaps more susceptible to misinformation published online. The TUC published data today which shows that the 1,000 richest people in Britain in 2008 were worth collectively around 250 billion, and today that's risen to over 700 billion. And against that background, there's, again, in this country alone, a huge rise in in-work poverty, and the traditional markers of social status like home ownership are becoming almost illusory for some young people. And so I wondered, in your opinion, is there perhaps a link between rising inequality on the one hand and more people becoming more susceptible to perhaps believing things online which may not be true, but perhaps offer them some comfort by blaming the foreigner or the outsider for their material problems that they face in their ordinary lives?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's it's a very much bigger question than just Brexit that you've raised, which is, from my point of view, is that if you look at not just the UK, but the Western countries, or where we're seeing the rise of populism and the real divisions in society, they're more or less all based on the same economic model. And what this is proving to me, in my opinion, is that trickle-down economics has not worked. Capitalism has not worked. Yes, it has lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty, but it has also created incredible divisions. And what we need to do is not just to look at a plaster over about changing taxation, for example, is completely looking at how do we reform capitalism into what I call responsible capitalism, where companies aren't just in pursuit of a single bottom line, but we actually start talking about a triple bottom line, about people, profit, and planet. Because I think until we actually look at the real root of the problem, it won't go away. Because on top of that, you have now overlaid with all of that that's been going on, all of that inequality and that's happening. Not only do you have a huge sway of population increasingly feeling there is no hope, there is no future, we might as well just destroy and knock everything down, because what is it we've got to lose? We just want to know that someone's listening to us and that our lives might get better. On top of that, you've also got the digital revolution, and you've got the possibility that in the future we will have a really big problem about not just the rich getting richer in the smaller hands of people, but who is going to pay into the public tax purse if every 75 jobs are going to be replaced by, say, 5? Are we going to start taxing robots? Who is it that's going to, we have such significant problems that, in my mind, going back, just to link it back to Brexit, that the biggest scandal of all of this is that we're wasting time, energy, money in an impossible task to try and fit a square peg into a round hole, when we should actually be addressing the policy issues that we need now to resolve the issues in 10 years, because that's the sort of timeline you need. We are playing around at the edges while, as the old saying goes, Rome is burning. And for your generation, my children, I am deeply, deeply worried and saddened.
I think this is a legal question, really. Much of the problem must be because of the international nature of the web. I mean, we have the Cancer Act 1939, but it's ignored entirely by Amazon, and nothing ever happens about it. And because the web has no borders, but law does, there seems to be a rather serious problem there for lawyers, that the law is simply not applied by and large, not enforced.
So there's been some interesting work that's been going on in a consultation by the Law Commission, who've been looking into this, into bringing in new legislation. And there are some announcements that are coming out, but it has to be done on an international level. It does, absolutely. But I think we need to go back, and a lot of this, I think in many areas, we make things very complicated. To me, it's actually a little bit simpler than that. It's not the medium, it's the message. And if the message is one that's inciting, say for our laws in the UK, inciting sexual or racial violence, we have the Malicious Communication Act. If it's actually, yes, they need updating, but if they're violating those laws, if they're graffiti on a wall or a tweet being published on an internet platform, they're breaking the law. So you go after the publishers of that platform. It's the medium that we can go after. And I do think it's possible to do that. And ironically, the people who are doing the most active work in that are the EU. So it's...
The gentleman at the back there was already for some time. Happy to take some more.
Hello. I buy most of your argument, but I worry that you've underplayed all the other negative influences that are going on to cause Trumpism, Brexit. Since the people who voted for Trump and voted Brexit tended to be older, they don't have Twitter accounts on the whole. They don't look at the internet. So they have been open to other abuses, like the Daily Mail, like some of the radio stations. You're quite right about this discomfiture that people who voted Trump and Brexit felt. They weren't anti-Europe, they were just anti. That's very worrying. Now, you're quite right that the younger generation may be at risk because of the internet. But people have always been in danger of being indoctrinated by the press barons in the past, radio stations now. And I would hasten to add religion. And your belief in there is a truth. It would be difficult to explain that to a Catholic, a Muslim, an atheist, an agnostic. Where's the truth there? I worry, I would love to agree with you that there is a truth, and it should certainly be backed up in a university by facts and information. But I wonder whether there is truth, and I wonder if you ought to be addressing all the other malinfluences, like the Daily Mail, which you did mention, and the radio stations, and the churches, and the mosques, which all are creating this ghastly situation. Sorry.
There is definitely not just one issue. And I chose the subject tonight because it's the rapidity and the inability to enforce or police this particular medium that worries me more than the others. Just to go on your point about older voters, actually, Facebook was one of the most successful ways, not Twitter, of manipulating the truth. It's coming to bear in both the US and in the Brexit vote. And just to recant something I was told, because now the age group of Facebook is actually is predominantly sort of 40 upwards. It's not where a lot of young people go to anymore. It's not the medium they're using. But during the Brexit referendum, I was told by somebody who was very senior in Cambridge Analytica, I had a meeting, and I was just very curious. I said, could you just tell me an example of the really successful ads that you were pumping out? Because they were pumping out millions of ads. And he told me that the two examples he gave me, which were aimed at the older demographic, were one was Sharia law is coming to the UK and Muslims can marry children. The second one was that Muslims and foreign immigrants coming eat dogs, because they'd worked out that many older people have pets. He said those were two of the most successful ads they were pushing out to a specific age group, demographic region. So they knew exactly what they were doing, and they were using that. So that's how dangerous and how granular it can get. So that's just one example to give you. But the other about what is truth. In different religions, yes. But I believe, going back to, I think we all have base human values. We believe it is wrong to kill. We believe in basic values that transcend religion and make us good human beings. And I think that's something most of us would adhere to.
I'm going to take just a couple more questions because we really do have to conclude the proceedings. I think, I don't know who was first. Take the gentleman there in the middle. Privilege of sitting in the middle.
Thank you. I've heard lots of lectures now that pick apart what Trump says and follows the thread and shows the lie of it. But I somehow feel that this is kind of missing the point, because we can all be comfortable in here and say, well, I wouldn't have been duped by that. Oh, that's other people. Or we can all feel comfortable that we wouldn't have been duped by the cake and eat it too. And we get to go home and feel good about that. But I guess my question is, these are all our friends and neighbors and fellow citizens who aren't stupid. The people who voted for Trump are not stupid, and the people who voted to leave are not stupid. So wrapping ourselves around the comfort that we wouldn't have been fooled, what good does that do us? How can we not reach out to the people, connect with the people who are our fellow citizens, and find ways to interact with them rather than just discarding them as stupid?
I don't think I ever mentioned that. So, I mean, I'm not sure where that question's coming from, because I've not accused anyone of being stupid, I never have. And I've said over again and again, and after the referendum vote, that unless you're clinically insane, most people voted because they thought it was best for themselves and their families. Nobody would vote to hurt themselves unless they were clinically insane. So, the idea that anyone is stupid or doing it for a negative, people did it because they thought there was a positive that was going to come out of it. They were voting for change, so I absolutely buy that. But to have people being sold a lie, I called it snake oil salesman, to be told things that are not true, is important. What we need to do more than anything is to reach out to the people who don't agree with us, who are buying those lies, who are getting ghettoized in their minds, that we reach out, we put our arms around, absolutely, and we start talking about what makes us the same, not the lies that are being peddled online by those salesmen, the snake oil salesmen, about what makes us different. So I look at it at a very different viewpoint from that, but it is actually about what makes us the same, not what makes us different. And this is not about anybody being stupid, because actually, I can tell you, somebody who drives a pickup truck and collects the rubbish is far cleverer than me, because I could never drive that truck. He's just better and more clever at different things than me. So people are all different, but we're all valuable. And that's the thing we have to get back to. So this whole idea of labeling and saying people calling other people stupid, that's actually not what most people, we need to listen to the truth that people are speaking. And very few people I know are calling anybody stupid.
I think we need to probably conclude on that point, because I see there are just too many questions to take them all. And this is certainly a debate which will continue. I was struck also with what you said about to fake the face of democracy. Whenever I see the tweets by President Trump talking about fake news, I think there is tremendous cynicism in there, because he is the producer of all the fake news. But I think we can all be agreed that we have not at all been treated to a fake lecture. So I would like you to join me in thanking Gina Miller again and the Mishcon family.